Yes, you've read that title correctly. NASA's first moon base is underwater.
Good luck and Godspeed. 40 seconds away from the Apollo 11 liftoff. All the second stage tanks now pressurized. 35 seconds and... Go with your Charlie and all your steering, it's great. Da 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 da. That's one small step for man.
You see, NASA has been involved with various programs and projects that are designed to increase the capabilities and skills for astronauts, most notable of which is endurance in different gravitational and pressure conditions. And for this occasion, NASA has specifically built an underwater base designed to simulate these different conditions. This quote-unquote base has been dubbed the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, or NBL for short. In essence, this laboratory is essentially a pool that at first glance doesn't look very unusual. It's around 202 feet long, 102 feet wide, which doesn't seem much out of the ordinary. However, what makes it very unusual is its depth, which clocks in at a whopping 40 feet. As a result, the pool can hold a whopping 6.2 million gallons of water, which is kept at a constant temperature of around 29 to 30 degrees Celsius. Furthermore, the inside of the pool isn't empty, as it is filled with all kinds of training facilities, most of which are directly focused on recreating the moon's surface. However, the pool also includes a mock-up version of the ISS, which is there to allow for microgravity spacewalk simulations. Additionally, the surface of the pool also houses a mock Orion capsule, which is used to simulate return landings. Now, what to us is most amusing is the fact that the surface of the pool itself is covered with dust-like matter that is virtually identical to what is found on the moon. In fact, a recreation of Neil Armstrong's footprint is also present. However, as simple as all this looks, simulating moon conditions and space conditions underwater is far from easy. In fact, to do this, you would need to achieve neutral buoyancy, which is tricky. So, let's first explain what is neutral buoyancy. If you were to drop an astronaut in water, you wouldn't really achieve anything, as spacesuits are specifically designed to float in water. A spacesuit is like a balloon. It is filled with air. This has been done so that there is no fear of drowning whatsoever once the astronauts land in the ocean. As a result, you would have to meticulously weigh down the spacesuit to prohibit it from floating up to the water's surface. This is done by adding weights to specific points on the suit, which is mostly done near the armpit area. Now, adding too much weight will result in the suit sinking, and therefore the astronaut sinking with it completely, which once again is not a desired result, which is why there is always a specific amount of weight that needs to be added to perfectly simulate the gravitational conditions in space, which is 0g. This is what we call neutral buoyancy, and it allows the astronaut to float through the water while being in full control over the altitude and depth he is in. There are no external factors that pull the astronaut either towards the bottom or towards the surface of the pool. However, neutral buoyancy is applicable only for spacewalks and microgravity situations, as the moon has its own gravitational field, which is approximately 1/6 of the gravity of our own planet. This is far more complex than achieving neutral buoyancy, so let's now take a better look at how NASA simulates the moon's gravity underwater. First first thing that needs to be done is to create a center of gravity that is identical to the moon's center of gravity. You wouldn't want astronauts to be completely disoriented by their own weight once you go to the moon, would you? In fact, if you watched the Apollo mission's video footage, you might have noticed how clumsy astronauts were back then, because the moon's gravitational force results in the astronauts' weight being much lower than it is on Earth. And since the inertia and the mass doesn't change, coupled with the fact that the traction is far lesser than on Earth, retaining balance is much harder than it is on our own home planet. This is why NASA needs to create perfect balance between inertia, mass, and weight. And since the inertia and the mass doesn't change, coupled with the fact that the traction is far lesser than on Earth, retaining balance is much harder than it is on our home planet. This is why NASA needs to create perfect balance between inertia, mass, and weight to perfectly replicate the moon's gravity without interfering with the actual weight of the astronauts. This is, for all intents and purposes, practically impossible to do, but what is being done is creating proper resistance as well as foaming to reduce usage of actual weights, which allows us to create approximate gravity of the moon. It isn't perfect, it's far from perfect, but it is more than enough for regular training. And with that out of the way, it's time to answer the million-dollar question, which is, what are actually astronauts doing underwater? So let's first go through the equipment the astronauts are using, starting with the spacesuit. NASA has decided on using the XEMU suit, which, albeit like the well-known EVA or EVA suit used on the ISS, is a completely different design altogether. The XEMU suit, which has been used for neutral buoyancy tests for a little more than half a year now, is internally pressurized to approximately 4 to 6 psi, which is some 10 psi less than the pressure of air on Earth. This reduced pressure is done so that the suit itself doesn't stiffen up and restrict the movement of the astronaut, while also providing a non-vacuum environment which would be lethal to the wearer. Now, to compensate for the possible lack of oxygen that stems from lower pressure, NASA has designed the tanks to hold a different mixture of air. Instead of 78 to 21% of nitrogen to oxygen ratio, the spacesuit holds 53% of nitrogen and 46% of oxygen. This also allows the astronauts to remain underwater for prolonged periods of time without any issues when exiting the pool, as underwater pressure tends to force excess nitrogen to be absorbed into the blood, which is then released once the person exits the water. This leads to bubbling around the person's joints and brain, which of course isn't good. Now, when it comes down to what astronauts are doing underwater, they're simulating the mundane tasks that they will be doing once they reach the moon. This includes pushing a cart around, collecting rocks, digging into the soil, as well as regular maintenance activities that will be done on the moon, including vehicle and tool inspections, and even some minor reparation simulations. This will also be done under lighting circumstances that will closely replicate those that will be present on the moon, which is to say, very dark. Now, this is a complicated process, no doubt, but it is evident that it isn't exactly technologically advanced. In fact, it seems like it could have been done in the 1960s also, which begs the question, why wasn't it done? Well, the thing is, it was actually done. In fact, these trainings were used both by the Soviets and the US, just not as extensively as they are today. And albeit this might seem like laziness to you now, the truth is that there simply wasn't a need to increase the agility and the dexterity of astronauts to such an extent back then. You see, back in the 1960s and the 1970s, during the height of the space race, Conquering the moon was nobody's priority, as it simply couldn't be achieved back then. As a result, spacewalks and moon exploration was much shorter than it is now. Nowadays, astronauts will stay on the moon for weeks on end, and they will perform very important tasks that will help with better understanding the moon itself and its eventual colonization, which is why taking great care of their equipment and their well-being is an imperative now. All in all, we've come a long way since our last visit to the moon, and it seems that with the Artemis 3, we might see the first steps of our colonization of the moon. What a time to be alive.